Hey, do you teach yoga? Have you ever trained to lead yoga classes, to be a yoga therapist? Have you ever owned a yoga studio? Maybe even just wondered what it was like for the women and men up there in front of the room on their mats, leading you through endless Surya Namaskars, down dogs, and pranayamas galore? Well, these are their stories, and mine. I'm Rebecca Sebastian, a 20-year yoga teacher, 10-year yoga therapist, yoga studio owner, and co-founder of a yoga-focused nonprofit. I've done a lot in the yoga world over the last 20 years, pretty much everything except had a water cooler. You know, a place to share stories, talk about struggles, successes, and find other people who do the same thing that I do. Welcome to Working in Yoga, a podcast and substitute water cooler for yoga folks to connect and build community, to share our unique profession, our challenges, and our journeys with the world. Hey friends, welcome to Working in Yoga. This week on the podcast, I have the absolute best conversation with Tristan Katz coming. Tristan is a marketing consultant, and we have the discussion everyone quietly wonders about. Can you market yoga without marketing perfectionism? I think so, but Tristan really guides us into thinking about how we interact with people online through marketing and encourages us to make friends and share stories. I'm going to be honest, this is my love language, or it would be if I believed in that kind of stuff. I think the power of making friends is one of my favorite things about doing this podcast and with chatting with people online about yoga in general. I know I've said in social media posts, and likely on here too, that I had long found yoga to be a really lonely job. We don't often interact with coworkers, the power dynamic is really uneven, and honestly, we're kind of mean to each other sometimes. But when I went online and found other folks that were having similar experiences that I was having, it was incredibly validating, and I found lots of people who were really amazing within this industry. And honestly, it gave me a deeper appreciation of the people who I was interacting with on a daily basis in yoga. Tristan shares about their experience in the yoga space and how marketing doesn't need to be perfect in order to be great. In fact, I agree with them. It is kind of a turnoff when everything about you online seems really perfect. But before we begin, will you go ahead and subscribe to the podcast from wherever you're listening? And if you happen to be listening on Google Podcasts, make sure that you go ahead and follow up on YouTube Music, as Google Podcasts is going away in April. If you love our content, taking an extra 30 seconds to leave a review also helps others find the podcast, and when more of us connect together, the better and stronger we all become together. Also, if you aren't on my newsletter, go ahead and head to the show notes and subscribe. You'll get a direct link to listen to the podcast each week, along with an email chatting about what I'm currently thinking about and seeing in the yoga space, along with links to other cool articles, podcasts, and offerings that are floating around the yoga world. One thing I'm thinking of making as a resource is a sum list of all the amazing yoga books that are coming out this year in 2024. It is truly wild to me how many good books are on the docket for this year. So make sure that you're paying attention to your favorite authors. Odds are they're publishing a book this year. And finally, thank you, of course, to our longtime sponsor, Sunlight Streams, the online self-care blog, for sponsoring this podcast. We talked last week, or a couple weeks ago maybe, about rest role models, both on Instagram and on the podcast. And if you read this blog, you can snag that blog about rest role models and others at www.thesunlightexperience.com/blog. Now, let's slide into our chat with Tristan Katz. Hey friends, welcome to Working in Yoga. Okay, so this is another in our series of talking about perfectionism within the yoga space, and we have a really unique thread that we're going to pull on today on the podcast. I'm going to introduce to you my friend, Tristan Katz. Tristan, will you tell everybody who you are and what you do?
Yes, thank you, Rebecca, for having me. I'm really excited to be here. So Tristan Katz, my pronouns are they and sometimes he. And let's see, I'm like, how can I tell this more creatively? Because we were talking before we pressed record about how boring bios can be sometimes. I started studying social justice in high school, really. I started studying activism and social movements and really started, I think, at that point around age 15, 16, for the first time understanding how to look at the United States in particular with a more critical lens. And of course, I didn't see it at the time, but that period in my life then set me up for an ongoing intrigue and dedication to social change and fighting for human rights. Of course, then I discovered, uh, as some of us do, that I was queer and trans along the way, right? And so that then clearly impacted how I was positioning myself in relationship to that 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 field of activism, right?
Yeah.
I was no longer just looking at it like, oh, I want to fight on behalf of others. It was like, oh, this is directly impacting me, these systems and these laws and this culture that we live in. That a lot of us are taught not to see or name. And I think we'll get into that in our conversation
Yeah.
today. So I started, you know, lots of winding paths to ultimately end up somehow in marketing. Uh, in the construction industry, of all things, I was helping my father with his carpentry education business.
Ah.
And he was teaching in-person events around the country for about 15 years. And I was managing the marketing, the event coordination, the website, sponsor coordination, the attendees, the continuing education. Like I did all the things so he could just show up and teach in person. And I realized that though I hated doing that in the construction industry, I could bring the same exact framework of skills into helping yoga folks. And I have been practicing yoga for more than 20 years. And so that was more the space I wanted to be in. But I didn't want to do it in a way that perpetuated the things that felt icky or unwelcoming to me about yoga. And so I started combining all my passion and interest in social justice and activism in the marketing work that I've been doing, primarily with yoga teachers, but also with all kinds of folks. And so that's how I got here, basically, inadvertently teaching marketing through a justice lens, an anti-oppression lens. We could talk about it in a lot of different ways. And then I also facilitate workshops on queer and trans inclusion, again, predominantly in yoga spaces, because that work is still needed. But I also do that work outside of yoga as well, because for better or worse, it's needed everywhere. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's where I am. That's where I'm coming from today. Yeah.
I am going to start by asking you. Ooh, hold on.
Yeah.
Excuse me. I'm going to start by asking you this question. When you said that you were seeing marketing in the yoga space that didn't align with you and who you were, I feel like that's such a relatable sentence to literally all of us. I mean, I look at pictures and I've thought sometimes about, I used to do these things on my studio site of like ironic, like me photoshopped on the top of a mountain kind of like yoga pictures because they're like ridiculous, right? Like they're so insane. What were you seeing in the yoga space that wasn't aligning with what you wanted to be seeing, or like as a student and
Oh,
practitioner?
I
I
mean,
mean,
even just sitting with this question, I can feel I'm
yeah.
currently in a real place of grief in relationship to yoga. And so that's what I think is
Uh-huh.
coming up for me. I'm really reckoning with the further I come into understanding who I am and my gender as a trans person, the more I feel unwelcomed in yoga. And so
Mm.
I've essentially entered what I keep calling, honestly, I haven't talked about this at all, but I keep calling it a crisis, a yoga crisis, because I don't know how to get back to my practice. And I'm not just talking about asana, I'm talking about meditation, I'm talking about, studying the sutras. Like I am at a place where I don't know how to get back in because there's so much hurt there.
Yeah.
And it starts with marketing on some level, right? Like the
Yeah.
messages that I was receiving when I first started practicing at 20 years old, it was like this space is for a certain body,
Yep.
right? You have to look a certain way, you have to be able to move a certain way. We're going to expect you to understand things and we're not going to explain them to you when you get into the space, right? There was a level of exclusivity. There was also a level of reinforcing certain stereotypes and norms, right? That certain bodies mattered. And I honestly felt so overlooked, as if I wasn't even seen in so many yoga spaces for so long. Even ones that I frequented several times a week, people would overlook me and not make eye contact, or learn my name. And I think part of that was because, first of all, I was feeling that exclusion in the air. And so I was
Yeah.
probably like making myself small. And I also think that people didn't know, quote, what to make of me, not because of how I expressed my gender at the time, but because I was never a typical yoga body. Like I just never fit in that way. And though I loved the physical practice, I was also seeing over and over again in marketing and in the studio culture who
Yeah.
was in the space, who wasn't in the space, what language was being used, what language wasn't being used, right? And it was just like this constant battling between here's this thing that I know and love that I get so much joy and healing from, and here are all these messages that it's for some of us and not for others. And that some of us deserve certain
Oof.
things, right? That others don't, joy, healing, etc. And then
Yeah.
like tease apart, like if that's what's happening in a yoga space, but it's also happening outside the yoga space. And so then on some level, yoga, because of the Western capitalism, white-centered culture and the way we access it here in the United States, it becomes this thing that doesn't feel as welcoming and inclusive and quote safe and healing for everybody, right? And it becomes this thing
Yeah.
that actually feels in some ways kind of toxic when it should not be because
Yeah.
it's like about liberation, right? And
Right.
embodiment that should
Yes.
be for everybody. Anyways, I'll pause there.
No, I actually, okay, so there's a lot of things that I want to talk about. One of the things that you mentioned that made me think of this sort of dichotomy between marketing and the experience that people have when they come into the space, right? And I hang out with and talk to a lot of like studio owners. And I think a lot of owners have this idea that we have to market in a particular way to get customers. And then we have to act that way in order when people come into our space in order to be congruent with our marketing, right? It's this weird frickin' cycle
Yes.
where like the marketing gets the people in the door, and then if we don't act like how we market,
Yep.
then we feel like frauds.
Yep.
And I'm like, but the thread that I wanted us to talk about is why we feel like frauds. Like
Mm,
why
mm.
what like if
Great.
how your marketing is fraudulent, babe, do something else. like,
Bingo.
like
I always say, look, I think, again, systems, capitalism, I'm thinking of capitalism in particular right now because we have to make money in this culture in order to
yeah,
pay for basic access to
yes,
resources, right? And so capitalism on some level asks us to show up, quote, perfectly or polished or curated, right? So that it looks a
yes,
certain way, it sends a certain message. And I think relating to that, when we think about expressing who a space is for or expressing values, right? The idea then becomes we can just check boxes. We used the right right words. We used the
yes,
quote right images. We put the BLM sign on the window or the pride flag during Pride Month or maybe all year
yes,
round, whatever it might be, right? We're checking the boxes. We're showing people what we care for. We're maybe putting a land acknowledgement in our email threads. You know what I mean? Like this goes
yeah,
into so many different ways, but how, and honestly, this goes right back to yoga. How are we actually embodying what we say we're practicing? So when somebody says in their marketing, which by the way, a sign in a window to me is marketing, right? A mission
yes,
statement or a value statement on a website, marketing. So when we say in our marketing, these are our values, this is who we welcome, this is who we care for, this is who we serve, but then somebody comes into the space and can feel so quickly through minute to minute actions, eye contact, body language, things that come out of people's mouths, the way we're greeted, the way we're not greeted, what clothes are in the space, right? Where the props are, who's talking about the props, how are the props referred to? The list goes on. Who are the
yes,
bathrooms for? All of these things then show messages that might say, hey, the marketing is phony.
yep.
And you've got the right words and it looks good. But when we come into the space, we can see that you can't back it up with action and that you're not embodied in understanding other people's lived experiences, right?
I talk about this checkbox thing with so many people in social justice spaces and yoga spaces. I will say my studio, I very clearly went after social justice folks and activists. And so a lot of those folks aren't in my space on the regular. And so we'll sit and talk about what we're doing in our communities and things like that. And that checkbox thing drives us all crazy because we're just like, I know everybody wants us to hand you a list of things you can be like, well, if I don't say namaste at the end, I'm good. If
Yes.
I, like all the things, if I say BLM in my window, I'm good. If I've got the pride flag up in June, I'm good. And the rest of us just like, yo, can we just talk for a minute? Like how are you? Are you okay?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
Right. Right. And I mean, it right now in this moment, it just so clearly connects to what we claim to be practicing as yoga students. Like if we
yes.
say we're practicing ahimsa, how are we relating to ahimsa nonviolence in a broad, sweeping, holistic, expansive way and not just perpetuating the notion that ahimsa is not eating meat, right? Like,
Yes.
so yes, I think that as a culture, and I'm even thinking right now in this moment of like the school system and the way that I was in like on some level indoctrinated to check boxes almost
Yes.
literally on
Yes.
exams. I had to check boxes, right? Like there was a lot of box checking in our culture. But to
Yes.
challenge dominant culture, we have to also challenge the box checking that we're all so inclined towards. It's not easy, but it is something that we can do like a mindful practice. Like, oh, what is my orientation right now? Is it towards appearing a certain way or is it towards living a certain way? Right. And how can we
Ooh.
share that in our marketing?
Can I ask you a complicated question?
Sure.
Because there are people who use checkbox as marketing. So there are folks in the world, in all walks of everything, right? Who will say this part of their marketing is the ability to allow people to check boxes to feel like they're good folks. Whether it's, I'm gonna pick a neutral topic, right? So let's say it's a woman who's marketing products towards men, and she's saying, "Hey, male humans, do you want to make your ladies happy? Do these 5 checkbox things. Do the dishes, bring her roses, whatever."
Yes.
And a lot of people don't realize that's marketing too.
Yes.
Instead of they hear it as a directive of this is how I become a good person.
Yes.
This is how I'm perfect or more perfect in
Yes.
whatever space I want to inhabit. I'm trying very hard not to say the yoga space, but that happens
Yep.
here too, right?
Absolutely.
Like, so how do we deconstruct that marketing? Because it's real tricky.
Yeah, I mean, I'm hearing so many different things when I sit with that question because I'm thinking about the like 3 ways to, right? Like 10 tricks
Yes.
to, right?
Yeah.
5 ways to, and then like usually the thing on the other side of that phrase is like gross. Like it's
Right.
toxic, it's diet culture or it's body shaming, or it's rooted in like heteronormative, like men have to please women in a certain way
Yes.
in order to whatever, right? Or
Yes.
women have to whatever. God, so what I'm wondering is like, first of all, how do we challenge the notion that we're selling something? Because I actually like, yes, you have to make
Mm.
money. You have to put a price on your work to make that money and you have to sell it. But your marketing doesn't have to be focused on or propelled forward by selling. I think personally, what we need more of in marketing is authenticity.
Yeah.
And I'm talking about like personal sharing, but with very significant boundaries. I'm talking about sharing your
Yeah.
values. I'm talking about educating people and being of service in your marketing and not just selling. When you
Yeah.
orient towards your marketing in that way, you're not gonna, it's just not gonna be like check these boxes to get this result, right? It's just not
Yeah.
going to be. And that way we can also say that yoga as a practice is not about checking boxes or like
Yeah.
achieving some sort of dominant culture dictated sense of what a human being quote should be. To me, yoga is about uncovering all the things that I've been told I am so that I can
Yeah.
get to something beyond that, right? Like,
Yeah.
and that's not something that capitalism is going to benefit from, and that's not something that capitalism is oriented towards, right? And so it's like, how do we use marketing as a capitalist space, because it inherently is, from
Yeah.
an anti-capitalist lens,
I think one of the things that helped me when I was first trying to unpack this in my brain is figuring out how to get really clear on the point of commoditization. Why are people giving me money and for what?
Mm.
So, in the yoga space, and I'll use myself as an example because I run a yoga studio, but in my manual, it says we don't sell yoga because yoga to me is this practice that's not sellable, right? It's a gift that was given from my teachers to me. It's a gift that I'm giving my students. So then what the hell am I selling if I'm not selling yoga? So we're very clear in my space that we sell experience, and it's tight. My space looks pretty. My people all are very friendly. It makes me so sad every time I hear people say, I walked into a yoga space, they didn't know my name. Makes me so twitchy because like I've written so many paragraphs to my team, like, look, y'all.
Learn. Yes. Like, pay attention to people.
Just
it's not that
nice.
hard.
Like, just be freaking nice.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, that's just being nice.
I mean, part of what I hear you're getting at, and I know you haven't even asked the question, is like, are we working on relationships, or are we working on transactions?
Yes.
Like,
yes.
And how in the world could we possibly create a space for yoga and focus on transaction? I mean, trust me, it's happening.
Yes.
I talked about how it's happening. Like, we know it's happening.
Yes.
But that's the antithesis of what I think the teachings and the practice is inviting us towards. And to me, when we think about Sangha, when we think about community, like, that's when people learn my name because I show up, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's when people start to get to know who I am because they see my face every day. They don't overlook anybody that makes them uncomfortable because they're different, right? And obviously I'm getting fiery and I'm talking about mainstream yoga.
I love it.
Right? I'm talking about, and I'm assuming, by the way, Rebecca, that you are white. Is that true?
It is, yes.
Yeah, like, we're two white people having this conversation about white dominated yoga, but it's also, able body dominated, it's thin dominated, it's cis het dominated, the list goes on. And so, yeah, are we creating relationship and community where people can bring themselves and be themselves, like, to me, the teachings invite us to, or are we focusing on transactions and a bottom line and a return on investment and profit and yada, yada? I know those studio models are out there. And I know, again, that we live in a capitalist society and we all need to have money in order to pay for things. And, right? What is the business model? What is the foundation? What is the focus? Yeah.
Now, I don't think we have to run that model. Do you?
No.
Okay. Say more.
I think, okay, I'm not a yoga studio owner. I've never owned a studio. I have been a part of managing studios. I've been in studios, culture, I will say, from my own business though, one of the early things I thought was, how do I make my work accessible for an audience, i.e. yoga teachers who aren't making enough money usually, right?
Yeah.
And yet I need to get paid. And so to me, that means I have scholarships, I have sliding scale, I talk to people and I don't say, prove to me that you need this scholarship. I just say, you tell me you need it, here it is, right? So some of these things that I'm doing in my business are access oriented and relationship oriented. I'm not trying to say this in a bypassing gross, like, just believe it and it will come way. But what I am saying is I've had to learn how to understand my own scarcity mindset and to understand the ways I've been taught not to trust people. And in order to create a business where I can just hear people when they tell me what they need, and I can trust that I will also create other pathways for more income to come in that will support me in operating those scholarship rates, right? And so forever, like, iterating and reiterating with, like, how do we, in the nitty gritty system structures, et cetera, of our businesses, orient more towards honoring people while also sustaining ourselves and less towards focusing on the transaction. Yeah.
Yeah, that trust piece. That's, I love that you said that, because that is now, and I'll just say, for those of you listening, if you're taking notes on how you can become more financially accessible, I use the 80-20 model. So my goal is to make my money in 80% of the people that come in the door, 20% of the people come through for free. I partner with local nonprofits. That's how I do it. I just say, hey, I've got 10 scholarships here. I've got 10 memberships here. Nobody knows but me. They're for you. They come. We're all a group, right? So there's lots of ways that you can make this accessible. But the trust thing, right? Like, and that's not just yoga businesses, that's every business, because business ownership is a bit of a mind fuck to begin with.
Yes.
And then on top of it, it makes you trust people less. It will offer you the opportunity to trust people less and less and less over time. How did you do that?
I learned early on that I mean, first of all, I'm trying to think about where to begin. Actually, I think I want to name Michelle Cassandra Johnson in this moment.
I love her.
Oh. She's, I mean, if anybody listens to me on other, I name her all the time. All the time. She has been one of the biggest influences on me in so many different ways, and she's a dear friend and colleague, and I'm emotional and honored to be able to call her that. Because her work has impacted me so profoundly. And what I learned from her in some way was give people information so that they understand how to locate themselves. And what I mean by that is help them see the tools and the frameworks, name the thing that culture doesn't want us to name. So in this moment, that might look like saying very explicitly on a website, like in your instance, I offer an 80-20 business model. This is how I do it. Here's why, right? This is the point. This is my goal. These are my values. Here's how I get it done. And when you share that, you're inviting people to understand their own positionality in relationship to it. Am I the 80 or am I the 20, right? I'm using your example, but for my work, or even like the sliding scale model, the tiered pricing model, tell people, give them tools so that they understand this isn't just, do you want it for less money? This is a community-oriented invitation so that you can pay more if you have the resources and positionality to do so, and that paying more will support folks at the lower rate who need the financial support, right? This is both community, like regenerative, and also like, sure, am I going to potentially, quote, lose money on the thing? Maybe. But again, what I'm trying to say is, back to the trust piece, if I give people information that says, here's how I want us to engage with this framework, or this offer, right? And our world is not equitable and equal, and here's how I want to run my business. I invite you to think about where you are in this conversation, right? Give people a point to connect with, and then I have to practice the trust part. And that doesn't mean I trust that every single person is paying the, quote, right price for them. It means I trust that, like, stuff is going to work out because I can't control everything,
Yeah.
And like, I'm 41 years old and I've been living this long and I've showed up and it's gotten done. So like, I'm going to keep figuring it out, that's the trust piece.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think what you're saying, though, also asks people to do something that when we're sliding into that sort of perfectionist mindset, we run away from. And that's to get really cozy with your money, because money is really an uncomfortable topic. It's a topic we can't often get good at in the yoga space, for sure. Like, there's no checkbox in A+. Like, literally, that one chick on the beach and that other chick who dresses up in costumes are the only people getting the A+ here. Like, how did you do that? How did you get really comfortable? Because part of why sliding scale can work is you have to know how much money you need to make.
Again, I think that's something that I continually have to revisit. Like, what am I, like, what is this worth right now? And even that, like, worth, what does that even mean? It's such a hard conversation. I'm pausing to reflect more on your question, and I've kind of lost it. Would you repeat it?
Yeah, I think that part of making pricing equitable for people is that you have to know your money and you have to get comfortable understanding money.
Right.
How the hell do you do that? Because we are also not raised in, that is not very good for capitalism.
No. And when I hear you say we're so many of us are uncomfortable with money, or we feel scarcity or fear, and we don't want to part with that resource because of scarcity and fear. And, and that's like generational, and it's real, and
Yeah.
it's systemic, and, it's so much bigger than us. First of all, I'm never comfortable.
That's perfect.
When it comes to my business income, I'm probably always in fear.
Yep.
Yeah. So I'm not saying like I put out this sliding scale and then I trust and I'm fine. Like, no, I'm scared all the time. I'm scared all the time and I do it anyways. Like, you know what I mean? And the thing is that I want to really highlight is that to me, when we say money or financial privilege, which is what we're talking about, financial access, let's just say, we could swap that out with any other form of privilege, right?
Yep.
White privilege, able-bodied privilege. I'm going to have fragility and unlearning and unpacking and discomfort when I come to face these ways that my identities or body has been upheld as a norm at the expense of others, right? And what that means. So to me, being in that discomfort of like reckoning with these access points, whether that's financial fear, abundance, whatever it is, right? Insecurity. I just like, we need to reckon with access is what I'm saying. And that's not going to be comfortable. And this is the last thing I want to say on this rant, which is, to me, yoga teaches us how to be with the discomfort.
Yeah.
So that is a place where we have to bring our practice, is like, how can I hold myself in this discomfort? What do I need? What tools, practices, and skills do I have available as a student of these teachings so that I can hold myself in this discomfort and grow?
I have a new hypothesis in my head. I'm going to say it out loud. You're going to tell me how it lands with you.
Okay.
This idea of yoga professionals who have a particular set of identities, most likely. We are most likely women. We are most likely white. We are most likely able bodied. When we wrestle with this money question, it is also likely the first time you have to wrestle being on the wrong side of privilege.
Yes. And as women in this culture, it's like cis women in this culture are privileged and have also are experiencing patriarchy, sexism, and misogyny. And both of those things are true. So, to me, on some level, especially, like, it's so interesting because it's like it's just these holdings of multiple things at the same time. It's like, like cis women, cis white women, fill in the blank, like those with more privilege who are cis women. We need them to have these teachings, right? We all need to have these teachings. And how are we using these teachings to avoid or bypass, right? Or not face what we have access to, or even the pain, right? Because I think a lot of cis women don't understand the way they've been impacted by patriarchy because it's so internalized. So to me, like, that's a part of the conversation as well, right?
Yeah. I think that you're absolutely right. I mean, especially as I myself am a cis woman, nobody had to teach me how to move in the world in order to have the patriarchy affect me less. Like, that was taught to me at birth. I knew exactly who I needed to be in proximity to in order for it to impact me less. Now, the money thing is more complicated because if we've all chosen this job, we have actively made a choice that takes us further away from being protected. And that is the literal opposite of what cis women are taught. Throughout our lives. It's uncomfortable as hell, but I want us to all get investment accounts and get better at this.
Yes. And when those who have been excluded from financial access, I'm thinking like, okay, let's back up a minute. Cisgender men, people who are assigned male at birth and are men, cisgender men have more proximity to power and privilege, right? They have more access to jobs, they have access to job security and wealth and yada yada. When we see cis women taking advantage of the access that cis women, that women and marginalized folks of all genders have been fighting for so long. To me, that is really important. Like we need folks who have been disenfranchised to thrive. That does include women, right?
Yes. Yes.
And part of what I hear you saying too in the conversation is that when we choose to go in the world of yoga, how does one create a financial thriving, right? Regardless of your identity.
Yes.
And as cis women, they will have more ease in finding financial thriving in yoga than folks of other identities. And all of that is true.
Yes. And it's complicated and it's uncomfortable to sit with. But like you said, you're going to do it anyway, even though you're scared. You're going to do it anyway. That's like such a great line, Tristan, like this, because I think people have this idea, if only I perform enough, if only I'm perfect enough, only if I get good enough, if only I take the next training, and that person will tell me how to be the hot yoga teacher, then it will be okay.
Oh, and again, I'm thinking about the educational system and then like, you know, 200-hour certification pathways and like this idea that once you're 200-hour certified, you are now a yoga teacher. Like that scared the freaking crap out of me when I was a yoga teacher, like actively teaching yoga, you know, 200 hours and that's it. And now I'm going to hold space for people to be in their bodies. Whoa. Like, so, but the same thing with like a bachelor's degree, or even like, how are these programs teaching us you've checked this box and now you're complete, or you've checked this box and now you have this degree, this certification, this level of recognition that you are a quote expert. To me, if again, we're going to be accountable to like the teachings, the practices, our values, creating community, creating a liberatory world, that means the learning is never freaking done. Right? Like,
yes.
And it doesn't mean I have to keep paying for training after training after training. I'm not even saying that. I'm saying I have to stay committed to my own education, to seeing what I don't naturally see on my own through my own lived experience so that I can work on behalf of others who are having a different experience of the world. Like it's an ongoing commitment to discomfort. What else is life? I'm on one now.
What else is yoga?
What else is yoga? And how is marketing and dominant culture saying that actually everything can be comfortable if you do this, right? If you are this person with this body, these identities, doing these things, buying these things, etc. But that kind of comfort is not available to all of us. And it's also a lie, right?
Yes, it is also a lie. That's the thing, is that it's telling you if you check all the boxes, if you do all the things, you're going to make money as a yoga teacher. Your classes are going to be full. All of a sudden, people are going to be looking to you to be the person who's going to come in the trainings and do the things. That is all a lie. If somebody's trying to tell you that in 6 weeks of learning how to do an email funnel, for example, you're going to fill all of your trainings. No, you're just going to show up every damn day and be grateful for every $70 you get.
Yes. And this is why, I mean, I love that you brought it into like, oh, if you just fix the email funnel, you'll nail it, right? It's like, it's true. God. Even the marketing space is saying, just do these things and your business will be okay, right? Do these things and you'll be successful. And that's not, it doesn't work that way. And it especially doesn't work that way right now in friggin' 2024, you know, 4 years into a global pandemic amidst genocides. Like, no, now is not the time to just like set up the email funnel and think that that's going to win, you know? And now is not the time to be looking for gold stars or ticking off quantity boxes, you know? Like I want to focus on being a full human. And being a full human in my marketing. And sometimes that means not getting a gold star. Sometimes that means doing something uncomfortable. Sometimes that means making a mistake. Sometimes that means not showing up on social media for more than a month because I'm not okay. You know, like that's the kind of marketing I want to be in, because that's going to be more oriented towards my well-being and the well-being of other people.
I just have, so much, all of that, because especially you're exactly right. Now in 2024, where we're all face down on the floor. I don't know who, like we are all there collectively speaking. And then I just want, if there is somebody listening who thinks, well, maybe what will help is me posting that tutorial of how to do down dog better. It's not. I'm just going to tell you right now, it's not. And the people who are watching that are people who already know how to do yoga. They're not your students. I want you to talk to those people. Talk to people like you're talking to your friends. Like,
Yes.
we're all on the fucking floor.
Thank you. Yes. So what is the yoga we need when we're all on the floor, right? It's not three downward dog tricks, right? It's
No.
not. And how are we perpetuating the notion that yoga is one thing, a physical practice, right? That can
Yes.
be captured in a cute little image or a video and then sold or shared and then go viral. Like that's not the yoga we need right now. We've had that, right?
Yes.
It is how yoga has become what it is today in this country.
Yes.
Let's challenge it, right? Because yoga is so much more than that. And don't get me wrong, I think it's super important to see bodies that aren't regarded as typical in quotes, right? Doing
Yes.
asana. I think that's so important for so many reasons. Obviously, I think that goes without saying. And yeah, we don't need more downward dog tutorials right now. How are we
No.
orienting towards what is actually happening in the collective and not just going about business as usual, you know?
Yeah, I think like what kept going through my head was if I'm on the floor, I don't care if you are my lifetime yoga teacher, Nischala Devi, or if you are my friend. I don't want to hear your yoga pose talk. I want you to throw me a blanket because I'm probably cold
Yes, I'm tired.
and tired. I want you to say to me, stay there for as long as you need.
Mm.
like can we bring that energy into how do we bring that energy into our marketing, Tristan?
Oh,
How do we do that?
Rebecca, the minute you said stay there as long as you need, I felt like you felt something in your body and I
Yeah.
felt something in mine because I was like, oh yeah, I do need to hear that. And
Yeah.
then I immediately thought, and this is how my brain works, that's a quote card. So what I mean is,
Yes.
that could be a graphic that you post on Instagram, right? That's a quote on a Canvas square or whatever that just says, stay there as long as you need, right?
Yeah.
Like if you know, right? And maybe that's this caption is like, if you know, you know. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But then stay where as there as long as you need. Maybe that's the theme of a newsletter,
Yeah.
right? Maybe that's a theme of something that you share, fill in the blank. I don't know, wherever you're taking up space in your marketing. To me, when we land on like a one-liner, especially that's like, oh, that's a theme that needs to be explored right now because I see it in these students, I feel it in me, I see it in you, right? It's resonating. I want to figure out how I can share on that theme repeatedly. So that
Yeah.
might be a quote post, and then the next week maybe it's a carousel slide post on the same theme, and then there's a newsletter on the same theme, right? And so we're reusing that theme that's super important, but exploring it in different ways, repeating ourselves in different ways over and over again. This is good marketing, and it's helping contribute to an important conversation that people want to be having right now, right?
Okay, so for those of you listening who are not attuned to marketing, Tristan just taught you a content pillar.
I did.
And you did it like so well. Like like off you went and I was like, "Oh, that's a content pillar right
Yep.
there. Stay as long as you need." Because then like my brain immediately is like, "Ooh, and that applies to so many different things, right?" Like I'd have a whole month where that content pillar meant like your timing is just for you and you're not on anybody else's time schedule. And like here like it's just maybe this is how we get into the creative part of this because we were talking before we hit record about the fun part about owning a business is that it's wildly creative. And so immediately you just gave me a box, and I use this analogy from Twyla Tharp. She always says if you have to think outside the box, you have to build the box first. And then you can be wildly creative within the parameters that you've gifted yourself. So I was like, oh, I hear the box, and now I want to run with it. How do you do that? Like, let's say you're looking for something new to talk about. How do you do that?
Mm. Great question. I love this question. One, if it's something that I'm screaming about over and over and over again to my friends,
Yes. Yeah. Perfect.
that's something for me to notice, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
I think I need to express something, right? And
Yeah.
maybe putting it into my marketing in some way if it connects to my work or my messaging, right? Then maybe that'll feel on some level cathartic and serve other people,
Yeah.
right? Because if it's lighting me up, it's probably lighting other people up too.
Yeah.
So that's one way in, is like watching what's making me get fiery or feel passionate or angry or excited, and paying attention to that. But it's also watching for patterns in people. And this was what I would think I was alluding to a minute ago, if I remember correctly. But like, I think with yoga teachers, if it's so funny how, and I know like as a culture, we're all so sedentary. So like, of course, everybody's coming in with type hip flexors and stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But like, what are the patterns in your students? Are they all exhausted? Are they all coming in saying, or even like in 1 week, have you heard from 2 people say, I know I need to take better care of myself, but, right? How can you speak to that theme when you start to see a through line in your students, in your community, in your studio, whatever it is? Is that something you want to add your voice to? Are you the person to add your voice to it? And then how can you, right? And that
Yeah.
will fit into marketing from a way that is much more of service and oriented towards meaningful content and not just salesy content.
Yeah. It made me think of something that I have heard from students since January 1st and this is very sort of like early Gen Z lingo, if they're like, well, I'm starting my yoga journey. And so my answer to everyone is, we're not the journey, we're the destination. So if you need to go to other places, that's fine, but this is where you'll end up, my friend. And like, it's just part of this idea that to me, there's this idea that we'll never be satisfied. And so I'm often giving people like what would it take for you to be satisfied right now where you are? Like what if you don't need to, what if you're not Frodo? What if there's no ring that you have to throw into a mountain? What if you could just hang out in the Shire forever? Now what?
Yeah, I'm really thinking part of what I'm hearing from you too is from you in this conversation too, is this and this goes back to like stay for as long as you need, is like this permission, right?
Yeah.
Permission to fill in the blank, not
Yeah.
do, right? Permission to slow down, permission to like really check in and with the body and what the body is saying
Yeah.
at once, right? Or what my energy is saying at once, and not just what I think I should be doing. That practice, which is something I think we explore on the mat a lot. Again, I just see a total parallel between that practice
Yeah.
on the mat and that practice in our work and in our marketing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have Okay. Do you have things that you tell yoga teachers to do when they're first starting marketing? Because like I've been at this for a while. So when you're like you just said this permission thing and my brain's like, you got to remember that, Rebecca, because that's going to be that's February.
Yep. 100%. We just
Right.
outlined your marketing content for
Yeah.
the next 2 months right here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I've had some practice at this. So what if you're new? Like what if you've never tried to market yourself before, or you have, but all that's come out is you just trying to mimic what other people are doing and you're not sure how to show up as yourself?
Oof. I think first of all, finding your voice as a teacher is like so hard. And to me, finding your voice as a teacher is very similar to trying to find your voice in your marketing.
Ooh,
So I just want to name,
nice.
I want to acknowledge that. Because to me, it can take a long time to find a groove in how you show up to share your work in the world. And there's a couple things I think I want to say about that are like, first of all, just start, right? Like it's like freaking yoga again. Like now starts the yoga, just start, like find some way to dip your toe into what is likely to be the uncomfortable world of marketing. And let me tell you, in my experience, even though I'm a freaking marketing quote, whatever expert or facilitator or educator, whatever, it does not get any easier to show up and talk about myself. It really doesn't. It's vulnerable and scary for so many reasons. So I just want to say that I think exercising the muscle the content muscle, the taking up space muscle, the being visible muscle. Find a way to start exercising that muscle so that you can start to develop it, the strength, right? Because if you start posting to Instagram, for example, over time, you will learn more about how you want to show up on that platform. You're not going to learn it if you don't start leaning into it, right? From just watching people and not putting the practice in your own body, you're not going to learn it. So we've got to find a way to show up. And I want to say too, that I'm always telling yoga teachers, like, we need to do more than just see your weekly class schedule. That is not going to help me understand who you are as a teacher. Not really. It's not going to help me connect to you. I do need to know what you're teaching and when, and if it's on Zoom, like I need to know all of that stuff, but I need more than your weekly class schedule. I need to understand who you are and what I'm going to experience with you on some level. I mean, you nailed it. You said that this is an experience, right?
Yep.
So I want to understand that in someone's marketing. And the last thing I want to say, it's kind of like as you're getting started is, you do not have to create new stuff all the time. I think branding, and which is a gross conversation too, but is also part of marketing, branding is about repetition. So don't feel like you have to create brand new stuff all the time. What I would do is find ways to repeat some of your core favorite things to say, right? And repeat it over and over and over again in different ways. And I always say, in a yoga class, like an asana class, yoga teachers are telling us to breathe. I don't know how many times, never once. And I'm like, you already told us though to breathe.
I know. It's
right?
True. Yeah.
The same thing happens in marketing. I want to see you say the same thing over and over again, because that's how we reach people.
Yeah.
We're not going to hear it if you only say it once. It's not going to land. You got to say it over and over and over again in different ways. So don't ever be afraid that you're repeating yourself in your marketing, because probably, and that's the other thing I always say, probably nobody's watching it as closely as you are.
My God. Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
I wish you would have been there in 2019 when I opened my studio, because I felt, and again, creativity is something that it's, best, worst quality kind of situation. Like I felt like I had to do new things every time. And I spent like a lot of time like making this content, and I reached a point where there was a huge amount of resistance, because it does take a lot of time. It takes me so much less time now because I've had the repetition and the practice, but I just wish somebody would have sat down and been like, yo, you don't need to do a new image for every single thing that you're doing. Oh my gosh. And like for my working in yoga Instagram page now, I've just taken to writing things on white slides.
Yes, right? Like screenshots of your notes app. Like,
yes.
Honestly, we are so inclined to overcomplicate it and make it so much harder than it needs to be, because we think it needs to look a certain way or be a certain way, aka likely perfect, right?
Yes. Yes.
Like, again, I am not opening Instagram for perfection. I am opening Instagram to be with people in some weird social media way, right? And I'm not, I know when someone's showing up with like the curated perfect thing, and that doesn't feel good to me. It feels like they're trying to sell me, like they're trying to manipulate me and con me. And that doesn't feel like something I want to get down with. So what I do want to get down with on Instagram are people who are being honest, or genuine or authentic again, right? Or vulnerable. But again, I'm not saying show up and share your personal life in your marketing, though some of us might. Like, it's not going to land if you are constantly striving towards this, like, quote, goal that you think is attainable, that's going to happen when you get the grid right or whatever it is in your marketing, or the sales funnel locked in, or the freebie or whatever it is. It doesn't work that way. We want, like, just show the notes app screenshot. Really,
it's
like,
true.
I want the quality of the content to matter, not the quantity, and not the polishedness, right? I want the message to matter.
It continues to surprise me. I think that once people start doing that, like when you show up in an authentic way, the sweetness that social media will rise up to meet you with, I think makes it then so much easier to do it again and again. I'll say the first post I did of 2024, I told this story about Franny, the stuffed animal who's in my attic, right? And I had just said one of the things I wanted for 2024 was for us to have conversations where we accidentally learn things like you had a stuffed rabbit named Franny who's still in your attic, who was your special toy. And it was just like, I mean, I know enough about marketing to know that I was telling a story through the slides, but the amazing responses from people where they were like telling me about their special toys, like Mr. Puff Puff and like, like all these, like, I was like teary at
Yeah.
these people who I only know or have relationships with online who were just so generous with themselves to tell me about their special stuffed animals that they had when they were a kid. Like, I loved it so much. And like, that's what I want for us is those sort of like authentic interactions. And from what I'm hearing you say, that's what you want for us too, which makes me feel good because you're the expert.
Well, I mean, I think we're craving connection and community right now. And I think that many of us, when we go to social media, are looking for that connection and community, and we don't get it when people are just selling us stuff, right? We get it when people share vulnerably and meaningfully and then invite us to share back, right? Which on some level is what social media is. So there is something beautiful about it, even though it's also a mess and terrible. And part of what I'm hearing you saying is like, you mentioned storytelling, like that story about the stuffed bunny has no direct quote tie to your marketing. However, it has a tie to relationship building and connection and community. And when we build that and focus less on the sales, we're more likely to actually connect with people in a meaningful way that leads to a real relationship and not just a client or a transaction, right?
Yeah. We are not in an industry where client transactions
No.
like what the, we're not selling widgets. Like this is yoga. Like,
I know. Also, can you please write that down too? We're not selling widgets. This is yoga. That is a quote, right? Like that's a newsletter. That's a social media post. You know what I mean? Like, absolutely. Absolutely.
And I think that makes us all more in when we do that. Like, I don't know about you, but like when I'm in, like I am in it when I get to talk to people and I get to hear about their stuffed animals and I get to like hear about the stories that they've had in yoga spaces, good, bad, otherwise, where we get to like talk to each other. And I think that is the antithesis of this perfectionism shit that we've been pushing.
Absolutely.
Okay, so here is our final wrap up quote. How do we stop doing that?
Oh, I don't know.
The end. That's it.
Honestly, I think I kind of want to end right there. I don't know. Noticing it is the first step. I don't know.
How about we say go make friends?
Yeah, I think that's a good one. I also think showing up and actually seeking to build relationship with people when you're like in training spaces, even like that's real, like network, network. Like remember what social media used to be? It used to be social networking. How do we even use the platforms in the way we might use a training space where we're actually in a room, virtual or in person, with people and actually talking to people and building relationship, right? Like building friends. Yes. Looking at students and other teachers as human beings, right? Like these are some of the ways, I guess, right? Like seeing people for their complexity, for their humanity, understanding that people are having different experiences than you are. Like these are some of the ways in.
That's it. That's our quote right there. Tell everybody how to find you.
Thank you. I am naturally on Instagram. By the way, that's the only platform that I really focus on when it comes to social media marketing, and I can talk about that more anytime. But I'm on Instagram. It's Tristan Katz Creative. That's TristanKatz Creative. And you can find my website and links there as well. If you're not on Instagram, you can find me at katz-creative.com. And I'm around all the yoga, as many yoga spaces that will have me. I will show up and talk about this stuff. I love talking to yoga teachers so much. And for some reason, I love talking to yoga teachers about marketing. So I'm here for it anytime.
Tristan, you're the best. This
Thank
was a
you.
great conversation. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Tristan, for coming on the podcast. Here are our key takeaways. First, marketing and experiences need to match. If you are marketing your business or studio, make sure that there is congruence between those two things. Nobody wants to come into a yoga class or space thinking it's one thing and then get another. If you feel like you need to do things a particular way in order to market your business that aren't exactly who you are, well, you don't. I promise. Be yourself, and it will be so much easier to market your business. Next, everything we do that communicates with our customers is marketing. The signs, the social media, the value statement, that is all marketing. So when you talk about how hard it is to run a business or how hard it is to get students, that's also marketing. I'm a big fan of the idea that marketing is like trying to get laid. First of all, you don't want to be a pity lay. And also, you want to make sure that there's enthusiastic consent in all things. And marketing and business start to get a lot more fun when you embrace that idea. Next, check boxes to be a good person from anyone is marketing. Consider using stories and relating to people instead of the 5 ways to improve, insert this type strategy that the 2010s made so popular online. Please consider marketing like building relationships versus trying to make transactions. There are a lot of things that you could quote from marketing terminology. For example, the know, like, and trust factor. But essentially, it's just nicer to build relationships than it is to see people as transactional items. Next, finding your voice as a teacher is a lot like finding your voice as a marketer. Start with asking yourself the question, is there something that I'm always talking about regarding yoga? And see where that thread leads you. Tristan said that on the podcast, and honestly, it is excellent advice and a great place to start with your marketing. And finally, we're not selling widgets. This is yoga, and we should be approaching marketing yoga with as much grace, joy, and humanity as we approach everything else. Now, next week on the podcast is my conversation with DEI facilitator and my favorite human, or one of them, Khalees Sanders. Khalees and I talk about what it is to be a perfect activist. You won't want to miss a moment. So let's check in around the water cooler then, friends. And until then, I want you to know that I am so grateful that you listened.